Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Packet Protector, the podcast at the intersection of networking and security. I'm Jennifer J.J. Manila, here with Drew Conry Murray, and we have a question for you. What do hackers, municipalities, and your love life all have in common? They depend on trust, and trust depends on identity. This week on Packet Protector, we're joined by the always thoughtful and occasionally provocative Wolf Goerlich, former Duo advisory legend and now a practicing CISO in the public sector. From SAML and OAuth to passwordless promises, we unpack what's working and what's totally broken in the world of authentication.
Yeah, Wolf's interesting because he comes from like the vendor world plus public sector plus a healthy respect for that human element which we need. So it's all about identity, but with heart and hard truths. We're going to talk about like how we got from SAML to FIDO2, the difference between AuthZ and AuthN, passwordless and passkeys. I learned a lot about passkeys today. And the one security practice that Wolf thinks needs to die. So whether you're managing a login box or building a strategy, this episode has a ton of insights. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I do have to say one thing. I don't know that I agree about the leeches.
Find out what she means.
First of all, for the listeners, this is totally a selfish endeavor on my part because I love working with you and I have a lot of questions about this. But let's level set on auth protocols. So how do you explain the difference in like the ecosystem between SAML and OAuth and OpenID stuff and who uses what, when, where? Like, what does this look like for us?
Can we throw in FIDO2, which is my other favorite acronym?
You can. You know, there's a long list and I can't even memorize them all. So yes, you can do FIDO2.
So way back in the dawn of time, and unfortunately, I'm not joking, I was teaching a class, so it was like, oh yeah, I was in grade school and I wanted to hit them. Around early 2000s, right? Like XML was all the rage, and we needed a way to federate identities from one domain to another, from one app to another, and what have you. That was the precursor of SAML. So SAML comes out 2005, XML driven, stored in your browser. That allows you to authenticate in one place and take that token and pass it into another application and go. Been around forever. SAML's cool, right? But things change. People don't like XML. They're like, hey, let's use JSON, let's use modern protocols. And also, by the way, about a decade later, things start really hopping with social media, and there's this need to have a authorization, not authentication, but have an authorization, right? Like my Twitter feed may want to sync up with an app I just wrote, or my Facebook may need to, sync up with my Twitter feed, all those sort of things. So the OpenID group comes out with OAuth, and OAuth is an authorization standard, not an authentication standard. So this was 2012, and this was designed for passing information back and forth. It is behind the scenes, so it's not in the browser. It's still token-based, but it's using JSON, not XML. And it's this lovely authorization framework so you can share information between apps.
So for instance, if I'm already logged into Teams, Teams can send an OAuth credential to LinkedIn and presto, I'm in LinkedIn.
Yes, or if you want Teams and LinkedIn to talk behind the scenes without you doing anything, which was the original OAuth thing. What you're getting to is the next step, and that's exactly what developers started doing. They're like, oh, this is cool. Why don't I allow like social logins and multiple different ways of passing login credentials? And mucked it all up, and red teamers had a blast for about 5 years. And then OpenID Connect is like, whoa, kids, please stop rolling your own. We have OIDC. And so OIDC does the authentication side, similar to SAML, exactly what you're talking about, social logins. That comes out around 2014 or so. So now we have these two competing standards. SAML by far is the most often one used in single sign-on, and then OIDC is a runner-up. Maybe about 20% of apps use one versus the other. Now, these are all predicating on the fact you logged in somewhere, right? They're not passing your credential, but they're passing a token. So token theft and all that is still a concern. But they're all assuming you logged in. And usually that meant logging in with a password and a multi-factor or something you forgot, something you lost. Out comes the FIDO Alliance, which is the same group that brought you UTF or the YubiKey standard. Out comes the FIDO Alliance in the late 2010s to say, you know what, passwords suck. And we all went, yes, passwords suck. And they're like, we got a solution. We're like, this is great. And they're like, it is called WebAuthn and CTAP. We're like, yes, go forth and do. And they're like, oh, by the way, we're going to call it FIDO2 because, hey, OIDC got to name their protocol after themselves. Why not? And so in 2019, the FIDO2 standard comes out for passwordless authentication, and that's what allows you to authenticate with a passkey. And you can chain these, right? Like I can chain passkey into OIDC and then use a JOT or a token to log into applications and so on and so forth.
So what's the difference between a password and a passkey?
Oh, well, passwords are text that you are entering in the system that the system is verifying
Hmm.
and authenticating and exchanging an access token. Now, when I say modern auth, I'm talking web tokens, but there's a variety of different tokens, obviously. I know you guys talk a lot about switches, so we can talk about TACAX or Radius or all those kind of crappy old school tokens. We're staying in the web here. With a passkey, I am not doing that. I'm doing a cryptographic communication with the website I'm trying to authenticate to.
Hmm.
I'm sharing my public key, it's verifying that public key, and then it's authenticating me. And so there is nothing I memorize. There's nothing I need to be aware of. I just need to have the public private key available to me. Now, historically, we did this on key rings and keychains, and we used to have key parties, which, so thankfully we moved beyond all that with the FIDO2 standard. That's typically stored in a hardware key or in your TPM in Windows or in your secure enclave in your phone,
Hmm.
and you're unlocking it with a biometric or a password. But what's super important here is that biometric and the password is not your passkey. That simply opens the vault so you can take out the passkey and exchange it with whoever you're logging in with.
What's the difference then between passwordless passkeys, especially if they're stored in a TPM and a normal device certificate that got issued?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because device certs are oftentimes used. The passkey step down, I'm going to authenticate to old stuff, uses that same cert based authentication mechanism you're probably aware of. But passkeys are meant to be exchanged with the WebAuthn protocol.
Okay.
So that means it's meant for a web application. There's phish resistant properties around it, anti-tampering properties around it. So there are different parameters that make it a little more secure.
Okay.
So where are we seeing passkeys being rolled out? Is this consumer facing? Is this a business application?
Oh, I'd like to say everywhere. Everyone loves a passkey. I was with Duo, and Duo was part of the FIDO Alliance, so we got this across the standard out. And we were so excited in 2019. We're like, passwords are gonna die. This is it. We've done it. We've solved everything. And here we are, like, 5 years later, 6 years later, and passkey adoption has been pretty moderate.
Hmm.
It's been predominantly on the consumer apps, but you have to have a savvy audience, right? They need to understand what a passkey is and how it works. On the enterprise apps, it's really been lagging. What you generally have, and this gets back to why those other protocols are important.
Hmm.
What you generally have is you have a single sign-on provider that you passkey authenticate or passwordless authenticate into, and then that single sign-on provider does SAML or OIDC. So it feels like I've been able to passwordless authenticate into all my apps, but the reality is I've only passwordless authenticated my SSO. Why? Because those enterprise apps are really lagging on passwordless adoption.
Okay. And are we talking sort of the classic on-prem client server enterprise apps as opposed to my SaaS apps?
SaaS apps I'm predominantly talking about because the on-prem ones are even worse.
Okay.
When you always have the asterisk that says legacy applications and then there's that little star next to it.
Yes, it's miserable.
Because my assumption is the SaaS folks would be in a better position, it sounds like, to help accelerate passkeys.
They are, and I've had a number of conversations with IONS clients, right? So I'm part of IONS faculty. IONS will bring me in and I'll do an advisory hour with an IONS client. These are SaaS providers, and they'll be like, hey, should we do passwordless? Please do passwordless. I told everyone passwords are going to die. Help me make that a reality. Don't make me a liar. And they're like, sure, but like no one wants to pay for it. And we're trying to roll out other features. And we just got our SSO in place. And so, like anything else, there is a natural inertia that happens in a SaaS application or SaaS vendor when you're verifying and prioritizing customer focused applications, customer focused features. And you're like, stop all that. We're going to put in a passkey. And then, yeah, are we though?
I have so many questions around passkeys, and it might be that we need to. Drew won't let me go rabbit trailing too far here, but
Please go.
we might need a whole episode just for this because I do just enough almost research to confuse myself into going, I don't know enough about passkeys to use them because I do have a handful of apps and websites that'll say, hey, stop using a password, dum dum. And here, let's do a passkey. Do you want to create a passkey? And I keep going, no, because I don't know WTF that is. So I've heard that there's challenges around like the portability and securing the passkey. just because the nature of you described it kind of almost certificate like that it can be tied into like a TPM and then unlocked. And so, it seems like there's times you wouldn't want to use a passkey. And it sounds like there's a little bit of barriers with the portability of passkeys in certain ecosystems and vulnerabilities related to the portability of passkeys in the ecosystems that do let you port them. Is that where we are with things?
I think that's well said. The original conception of the standard, and again, it's important to recognize this came out in 2019. So,
and this is the FIDO2 WebAuthn standard we're talking about?
Exactly.
Okay.
SAML has a 14-year head start on FIDO2 WebAuthn as a standard, right? So the adoption is going to take some time. But the original conception was one user on one device using that device's hardware to authenticate into one web application. And very quickly we realized that doesn't work because there's multiple different applications. We have multiple different devices and there's roaming and shared devices and all sorts of use cases. So if you are sitting there going, hey, what is the safest, easiest way for me to use passkeys today? I would say it's most likely your password manager, which is ironic because a password manager is meant to store passwords, not passwordless. But password managers are really good at having agents in multiple different places, passing authentication back and forth. And so most of the modern password managers will have the ability to store a passkey in it. And that is a secure way of sharing, as opposed to putting on your like iCloud. Is that sharing? Everyone gets their iCloud popped once in a while, right?
Yeah.
Or worse, putting in your browser. Oh my goodness, how many times that browser has been popped over the years. So if you're looking at getting past your hardware and looking for a solution, password managers every day.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of ever storing anything in the browser memory, period, as it relates to, passwords and even certain autofill functions. That's too easy to scrape and does not give me a warm and fuzzy feeling. So you mentioned FIDO2 and you said WebAuthn, and I think so I keep saying WebAuth and AuthZ. And so I'm untangling that to say or ask, is authn authentication and AuthZ is authorization like you described in OAuth?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Authn, I'm logging in, I'm gaining initial access. Authorization, I've already logged in or I've exchanged a token or something has happened for me and I'm able to access or take certain actions, access certain data, take certain actions.
So what do you think? We've talked about some of the complexities around the passkey infrastructure, TPMs, public-private key pairs, and so on, and then having to tie all that into an SSO system. Do you see any, company out there, I'm thinking Microsoft, that if they decided to get behind this and push it, or maybe AWS, that they could actually sort of force the industry to go that way?
Well, lots of vendors are behind it, right? So Microsoft, Apple, Google, I mean, you name the vendor, they're on the FIDO Alliance and championing the standard. It's more about those downstream applications.
Because it is Microsoft and Google that keep pushing me into passkeys. I have to ask one more squirrel question. If you're storing a passkey in a password manager,
Yes.
are you in any better posture than a long passphrase word?
Oh, so that's a good one. So one of my favorite things to play with is this attacker tool called Evil Jinx. Sometimes you'll hear it called Evil Nginx. And what Evil Jinx does, and I'm going to use that phrasing because that's what the creator uses these days, is it's a proxy. So you get phished and you think you're logging in, but it's actually proxying that access to a web application behind it. And you log in and you've got multi-factor because we all use multi-factor now, right? We know passwords suck. And so you do the push or you enter the OTP and you complete the login. Well, tools like Evil Jinx, when configured as a proxy and doing an adversary in the middle attack, will see all that traffic going back and forth. And remember, at the end of the day, all we're doing is exchanging a token, right? The whole point is to exchange a SAML token or a OIDC token, or worst case, some cookie session identifier. Proxies are able to get those. So what's fascinating to me is like all the zero trust stuff you always hear about, like strong passwords, huge, you can have a 500 character pass. No, you probably couldn't, but you have a very long password. You could have push multi-factor. You could even multi-factor multiple times, right? You can be doing device checks, device health, and be in the right segment, everything could be absolutely perfect. If you go through that proxy, that session token that comes back, again, a SAML assertion or whatever, or a cookie or a jot, will get copied in that proxy and the adversary can steal your session immediately. And all those controls go away. which is why things like passkeys are incredibly important. One of the features, they'll talk about being phish resistant, but one of the features is channel binding. So what that means is if I'm authenticating and I've got a browser and I'm putting the credential in, if that is relayed or proxied, it's a different channel and immediately breaks it. So at the protocol level, these types of FIDO2 authenticators will not be phishable by proxy style attacks like Evil Jinx.
Okay. And that has to do with the use of the passphrase specifically, or how that session that's created?
It's how it's exchanged. So on the FIDO2 protocol is WebAuthn, and for any of your listeners who want to check out the spec, within WebAuthn there is threat models, and it talks about device binding and channel binding. Those are the specific properties.
So we'll get to zero trust in a second because you brought it up, but one last thing on passkeys, because it sounds like it's again tied into a public key infrastructure. So we're dealing with keys and cryptography. Is there a risk from quantum computing to passkeys, or are they also looking at post-quantum encryption algorithms?
Drew issues a bingo card for every podcast and has to make sure that somebody wins.
So quantum, thank you for not asking about AI yet. Obviously, quantum is going to break a lot of crypto. The issue with quantum, obviously, is it's not yet faster than real computers. We all know the mechanical issues. One of these days, and I've been hearing about it for 10 years, it will be able to break any encryption cipher. At that point in time, all sorts of things break down, including TLS, including how we store hashes. Will that have an impact on passkeys? Absolutely. They're being exchanged over TLS, and it's using a public-private key pair. Is that my top concern when crypto gets broken? I'm a little more concerned about the session traffic and the token exchange. Because again, once you have that token, that's what's really at risk. So for theft, for session theft and session takeover. So probably, but also, and I'm going to say this, and then 5 years later, people are going to be like, well, you told them. And I'll be like, oh man, JJ and Drew tricked me. But if I had to put money on it, I would expect that other easier avenues to steal data or to monetize will occur first before passkeys get broken.
As we get to, post-quantum cryptography, we'll, let's make up FIDO3 or FIDO4 or whatever that next revision is. I'm just assuming if we are basing it on kind of PKI constructs, whatever the next generation of quantum resistant PKI, whatever that is going to be with that type of architecture, we would just assimilate that into this process.
Exactly, right? So it gets back to changing your algorithms and keeping up. Yes.
So now on to zero trust, because I'm just drooling to hear about this.
And all the buzzwords.
Wolf does a lot of work in zero trust. Zero trust is a real thing. We do this. We talk about identity being a perimeter and the role of identity. How has that changed in the context of zero trust?
So I was doing consulting in the 2010s, and everyone kept talking about zero trust, much like they're talking about cloud. Like, oh, it's just someone else's firewall. It's just a buzzword. And it had me so excited because I remember what happened with cloud, that I left my consulting gig and went to Duo for 5 years, really focusing very heavily on zero trust. And one of the only times I've been in the product space, so it was very eye-opening for me. But your zero trust concept, the idea of identity as a perimeter sounds like great on the side, like identity is a new perimeter. Until you talk to any IAM person ever, they're like, oh my God, please no. We don't even know, like we haven't got our back ready. We don't even
Not
know
it.
credentials, right? Like it's a mess. So what I like to say is, when I think about zero trust, what I like to say is we're extending or revoking a trust boundary. How we do that is dependent on the technology, the user, the identity that's accessing a resource. It could be at authentication, right? And this is all the stuff we put in place to make sure the person really is who they say they are. Again, remember though, all this exchange for a session token. So like that can be undermined. I gave a talk at RSA, like ripping apart all the basic fundamental assumptions of zero trust and talking about how it'd be breached. Number one, right, that identity token. It could also be done at the authorization layer, which I think is really cool. Like, right, if you're in a cloud, let's say you're bopping around AWS. Today, we create roles, we map those roles to different resources, we map people to different roles, and then the dev teams combine, and then it used to be DevOps, now it's back to Dev and Ops, and we just inserted SRE, can you move? And so suddenly we have all these roles that don't match, and all these groups that don't match, and all these people don't, and it's a mess. And this is not only a cloud issue, this is an identity problem we've faced for, decades. Like it's a mess. So some of the more intriguing things on the authorization side say, hey, I'm logging in, I'm on this box, it's this time of day, my name's Wolf, and you let people in who start with the letter W. And oh, by the way, there's a ticket that says I can access these 3 servers. Can I do it? And when I go to log in, it takes, remember, we were talking about all these different tokens. One of them was either SAML assertion, or another one is a JOT, which has the entitlements you have. It takes that and enriches it. It goes, oh yeah, Wolf can totally access these 3 servers because he's tall enough to ride the ride. He's got a beard and there's a ticket. If I'm in there and something happens, like the ticket gets closed or I shave off my beard because I lost my mind, that access gets revoked. So like I can be midstream doing something and that access gets yanked out. So from a zero trust perspective at the identity layer, now there's JJ, as you well know, because you're a master at the networking side, and there's a lot of different ways to extend or revoke trust. But at the identity layer, there's some really cool things that can happen there, because in addition to everything I just mentioned, what happens if we notice something suspicious, right? What happens if we notice the behavior is wrong? What happens if we notice that we thought it was Wolf, but it was really Drew pretending to be Wolf?
He does have a beard.
He does have a beard.
And he's got glasses.
And he's got glasses. This could work. He's probably equally tall as me or around there.
And he does have a W in his name. If you just flipped it around backwards, it starts with W.
I'm saying all this, right? That would pass a regex filter. You know it would. So if suddenly it's Drew on the terminal, we're like, wait a minute. In the past, there's nothing to do but wait till a SOC noticed and investigated and did something. By that time, you're screwed. So the fun part about zero trust is moving the response more towards real time and saying, I don't trust this. I'm either going to log them out, or I'm going to deprivilege that session so that you can maybe still do a couple of things, but you can't do the high privilege stuff. And all that's at the authorization layer with the protocols we've been talking about.
I did see a session. I didn't watch the session, but I want to go back and watch the recording at RSA this year or last year that was basically about micro segmentation using identity, like using identity to micro segment, especially in, cloud native applications. And I thought, what a fantastic idea. And then I immediately also thought, what a freaking tangled mess of how do you manage that and document that and maintain that without some other set of tools just on top of things. But I think the other challenge we have is, like, I know Drew and I on this podcast, a lot of our listeners deal with, is like in the IoT and OT space. So, operational technology, IoT type things that are just not usually user based. And one of the, the big longstanding challenges is identity, authentication, authorization related to, the things that are not attached to people behind a keyboard. Is that even in scope for any of the protocols we're talking about now, or is that just a different can of worms?
Well, certainly some of the early things about OAuth, and probably the part of OAuth that we all know the most and hate the most, at least my wife would know this and hate this, is when you're on the Roku and it's like, enter this code if you want to authorize this device. You just want to watch your show and you end up like throwing the remote across the room, right? So like there are flows to authorize devices to do certain things, and that's part of the OAuth standard. So yes, that said, there's so many different ways with IoT devices to do identification and these sort of things. I was working with an organization, petrochemical company, and they were rolling out a whole bunch of IoT sensors, and they were all on the cellular network. And they actually used a combination of SIM card, the ID on the SIM card, with a device cert. So the SIM card was a username, the device cert was effectively the credential. That was authenticating the device. And then they had some other things that would look at, was it where it was supposed to be? Had the card, recently changed? Any of those sort of things to spot anonymous behavior. So there's a lot of cool things to do, but it's been a while since I was in the OT space. When I was last looking at it, maybe about 10 years ago, I was looking at the food industry. And all the equipment was like Windows NT. Like it was all just...
Nothing has changed, if that makes you feel any better.
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I do love the cellular use cases. And now that we have private cellular where we can put our own cellular infrastructure and use it like Wi-Fi, basically, I think that's just such a cool thing because we do have fairly immutable identities at that point. But
right. Super cool.
Yeah.
I'm curious in that IoT, OT context, like one of the challenges in the business spaces, you're dealing with people who are in an office one day, on the road one day, on a different device, different platform. Whereas for IoT or OT, that kind of stuff doesn't change very often. Does that make it a slightly simpler space to work in, or are there complexities that I'm not aware of?
Well, again, it's been a while since I worked in the OT world, but to your point, I found OT to be easier for behavior analytics. Like I knew this equipment talked to that equipment
Yeah.
on this schedule with this protocol, and it was much easier for me to map that out and alert on anonymous behavior.
Hmm.
So when my pen testers, because this was, we would go in, we would do a high level assessment, and then we'd map out the environment, and then we'd bring in pen testers to do some testing. When my pen testers did anything, if we had that fundamental understanding, I mean, they just stood out like night and day, right? It was like, no camouflage, you couldn't hide anywhere, because any sort of movement immediately was flagged as, non-production, non-expected traffic. So I would think so, but again, not my space these days. In my current role, I do have some operational responsibilities for critical infrastructure, but it's a whole other world when you're talking about government.
I don't work in OT. I am a CISO for a county government and therefore do have some critical infrastructure, like little, not like food manufacturing, but maybe like water.
Well, it's like the same thing I was telling you, JJ. Like one day I discovered I was responsible for an airport. Like, things happen when you're a CISO, and they're like, by the way,
Yeah.
this is also your responsibility. And
That's the fun part though, right?
100%.
Drew, do you want to keep filling out the bingo card?
Sure, why not? So we hit the quantum bingo card. I guess we should hit the AI bingo square. Uh,
He said not to ask him about AI.
well,
You're
just
doing
because
it
he says
anyway.
not to doesn't mean we're not going to.
Drew's spicy today.
Wolf, what's going on in the world of AI as it relates to identity and authentication?
I've dusted off a talk. I used to give a talk early days of OWASP called Surviving the Robot Apocalypse,
Hmm.
which was all about using OWASP Top 10 to circumvent software under the idea that maybe one day we would have smart robots and smart toasters and everything. And so I had to dust that off because, of course, now we have smart machines. And so I've been giving this talk, Surviving the Robot Apocalypse, part 2.
Hmm.
Because there is such an attack surface around these LLMs. And as you might imagine, you can pretty rapidly social engineer them into just about anything.
Hmm.
With a little bit of nudges, a little bit of patience. They're like, no, I can't do that. No, I can't do that. I'm sorry, Dave. I cannot do that. You're like, yeah, but if it was for my dead grandma. Oh, well, grandma. Sure. Here you go.
Like drunk toddlers that are bribed with candy.
Yes. No. Oh, candy? Sure. Um, so it's been pretty fascinating to play in this space. One of the things that I'm looking at, though, putting aside breaking in, convincing them to do things they shouldn't, all the weirdness that happens. One of the recent ones, I'm playing around with AI code writing, right? This vibe coding idea and running it through tests. One of my favorite examples just recently happened to me where you say, don't stop until it passes the test. And eventually, if it's a bad enough bug, it goes, I cannot fix this bug, but I can delete the test. And then it's like, I've succeeded. I'm the best. So LLMs are a lot of fun, but in the identity space, what I'm most intrigued about is this idea of agentic
Yes.
AI, right?
Yep.
And I'm working on, back to IONS, I'm working on right now a symposium, which is one of their longer sessions on explaining how we're going to do this. Because we kind of got a teaser with this with service accounts, and we did terribly in the identity and access management space. We kind of got a teaser with this with RPA, robot process automation.
Hmm.
And we pretty quickly did terrible with that, and then figured, oh, that's out of scope anyways. We won't worry about that. It's sort of like when guests come over, do you close that one door to that one room? You hope no one notices. That's where RPA is today. And so now we have agentic AI, and this idea that I've got a piece of code which I need to dynamically manage the identity for and the authorization for, and recognize that it can be easily tricked, and recognize that it will try to circumvent its controls if it gets bored or can't solve a bug or whatever it does create a really interesting mix. So I'm looking at a combination of how do we do machine identity? We can leverage a lot of our current standards to do that. How do we do authorization? Well, we can use some of our models for people, but also we can use just in time and the defang techniques I was alluding to earlier, right? I give you a session token with privilege. You do something that says you shouldn't have those privileges. I remove them from your session token. I'm also starting to play around with this idea of using insider threat techniques to monitor the AI. So if you have got agentic LLMs doing certain behavior, what does it look like when they go malicious, and how do I know? So like anything with early days of innovation, we're starting to just beg and borrow and use the stuff that we have to solve the problem. And then we'll have to develop a better tool set. but it's early days. It's fun days too.
Yeah, I guess, have you looked at Model Context Protocol, MCP,
Yeah.
in regard to agentic? Yeah.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? Because it seems like great, you've enabled these AI agents to communicate and talk to each other and pass information and give each other instructions and access third-party systems, but we've just sort of created the whole identity and access management and authorization problem all over again and magnified it by a trillion. So is MCP like, can you plug in authentication, authorization, that kind of thing to that protocol, or do you think others will emerge that are going to address this space?
You can leverage that, but I suspect as with anything else, we're going to run on a stack of protocols to do this.
Mhm.
So I don't know that I would use MCP for authentication, but I like where you're going there. And also, of course, the RAG models, how do we limit the data and what do we limit where it can see and what do we limit what actions it can take?
Mhm.
It's all going to be built on all the layers of the technology we have today. It's going to have to be.
I guess I was thinking like containers, they know they need connectivity, but they didn't decide to solve that problem. They created the CNI where you could plug in networking, essentially fundamentals to it. And I
Yeah.
assume agentic AI may go that way as well.
I wanted to circle back on something because I've worked with a lot of municipalities over my years, but you guys do, like, I was going to say your little cities, but you're in a county government and you guys do have a little bit of everything from emergency services to
We do. Yes.
health and airports, apparently. Do you have unique identity and authentication challenges in public sector that you might be different than what you saw in the customers you worked with, like where you were at Duo in the commercial space?
Yeah, so the county I'm at is one of the largest counties in the nation. I think we're in the top 10%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We're number 2 by population in Michigan, number 1 by tax revenue and by employees. So to your point, I've got 1.3 million citizens being served by 5,000 people in the county, from health and human services to law enforcement, emergencies, water, critical infrastructure, and the list goes on and on and on. What is also fascinating about that is a couple of the services that we perform. I'll give you two. One on the emergency management. So when there's an emergency that happens in and around where in the country, we will dispatch people down to help. And that people who are dispatching are not only employees, but they're also volunteers. They may be local emergency management personnel. They may be local volunteers. They may be other groups. So when we're doing emergency management services and we are doing this sort of helping hands across other counties, you end up with a variety of different identities. They're not an employee, they're not a customer, they're not a partner, but you still need to provide them access.
Mm.
And it's only very limited because it's popped up for the emergency, and when the emergency fades, that goes away. So that's one unique challenge. Another unique challenge on the same vein is the software that we created for law enforcement runs on multiple counties throughout the nation as well. So we also have other police departments, other cities, everywhere else that we got to help out. Now, I don't our software. And so again, that's a user who's a user of our service but isn't an employee.
Mhm.
And then we have citizens, and then we have partners, and then we also have cities and villages and townships that are within the county that we offer services to. So I miss the days. I started off in financial services, and I miss the days where I had an employee and I had a contractor and I had an intern and I had like a customer, and those were my 4 identity types.
Yeah.
Mm.
That was nice. That was clean.
Yeah. You got lucky with that one.
Yes.
I mean, I've always joked about the 50 Shades of Guest because everybody talks about like us and not us, right? Us or them. And I mean, even in a highly regulated industry, there's still more than just us and them,
Right.
us and not us, right? There's all of these tiers of different relationships that you have to account for in your authentication schemes.
When we were at Duo was very big at design research, and we did a research project around devices. Because to your point, oftentimes it's a managed device or a non-managed device, right? How often you do the 2 devices? I like that 50 shades. I may have to steal that. 50 shades of devices, right? We actually found that most organizations had anywhere from 3 to 7 different device types. They would talk, oh, this managed or not managed, but it was really fell into this whole spectrum of gray. And back to identity-based security and perimeters, what that device type was mattered, right? Like you wanted to have a pair of Wolf on a privileged workstation versus Wolf on his phone should not have the same access.
Mhm.
So yeah, the old tuples of guest or non-guest, and manager, non-managed. He gives us a 4x4 square, and then we add the right access, and we plug them in the right networks, and we put them on the right VLAN. Great for textbooks. Never happened.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's a cute example, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
not real.
So being respectful of your time, let's wrap up on this question. If there was a cybersecurity practice that you could kill, what would it be and why?
Oh, wow. We've been talking a lot about identity and authentication. Of course,
Mhm.
that all goes back to the password. The first password was on an IBM. I think it was a 7094 in MIT. The first password breach was on an IBM 7094 at MIT. Like for 60 years, we've been struggling with this. And for half that time, for 30 years, this is 2025 as we're recording this, 1995, something happened, started stealing all the passwords. You guys remember what it was?
Mm.
The very first fish.
Oh,
1995.
95 AOL.
Wow.
dang.
So we are on the 30th anniversary of phishing, stealing credentials. I believe when cyber historians look back at our time, they're going to look back at it the same way we look back in fear and loathing and disgust at the medical practice that used to apply leeches.
Hey,
Passwords are leeches?
hey.
No, fish simulations are leeches.
Ah.
Because we take this idea that, oh, bad guys may do something bad. I know what we'll do. We'll be bad to our users. And we've been doing this for like 10 years, and it doesn't really improve phishing. It just creates discontent. And I remember being so angry during the pandemic when people were phishing nurses. My kid at the time was in healthcare, and he got a phish. It's like, oh, please sign here if you want PPE and masks and everything. Of course, everyone did, and it's so their username and password. And they're like, oh, you're a bad user. I'm like, what? CISO authorized that? That was terrible. Or during the economic crisis when they're like, oh, congratulations, you got a bonus. Click here to see how much, and stole your password. Who does that?
Yeah. The worst one I ever heard, and Wolf, you probably heard the same one because it was in the same circle we were swimming in at the time. Not any of our customers, but
Yeah.
we were probably told about it around the same time and asked for feedback. And I think it was actually a managed security service provider was putting phishing together for clients and did an active shooter in a school phishing email, which is just not cool, right? That's just equally past the line of no go.
So are you against anti-phishing training in general, or just against like really egregious, essentially social engineering attacks against your own users?
The problem is when you have a tool and you have no empathy and no guidelines and no guardrails, and you have a whole bunch of security people, and who runs the phishing test? It's usually your college kid who's all excited, and you give him this thing, and he's like, "Oh, thank you." Like,
I'm gonna get
right?
them.
It's the intern or the junior level guy. It is too easy to make these mistakes again and again. So I unfortunately, like so many of you, by regulation, I have to do a phishing test, and I make it so easy. I'm like, we would never phish you. Please click this button and give us our password. Honest, trust us. Hugs and kisses. Like I make our password phishing tests so visible. But what's fascinating is my password click rate when I talk to others, either in similar roles as me, but others also across the globe, we're still around the same amount of fails because people who are going to fail are still going to fail. So I want this practice to die. I think it should be killed and forgotten. I will not back off the mental image of this being a leech on our field. And until we can get there, there's better ways to do this, as we all know. Through identity protections. If you have a passwordless app, you don't need to worry about someone stealing your password. Or through better phishing techniques or better anti-phishing tools, deploying LLMs to read emails and look for, crazy, scary things. That alone can radically decrease the amount of fish you get.
Yep. And I just, for Drew's benefit here, I do want to differentiate the security awareness training from phishing simulations. So I think Wolf is speaking about like phishing simulations specifically, which is just one piece of a security awareness program, but not down with the whole security awareness program. Is that where we are?
100%. I do monthly awareness training programs. Every month, my whole county goes through a 10, 15-minute course. So I'm all about culture and security and training. It's the natural meanness that comes from tricking and duping your user community.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I can get behind that.
So, Wolf, we're out of time, but I do think we need to have you back because there's a lot more we could have got into. But in the meantime, where can folks find you online? Do you have anything you want to promote or talk about?
Yeah, sure. So they can always find me on jwgoerlich.com. I'm on Mastodon and Blue Sky and everywhere else as JW Goerlich. Oh, my partner and I have a book coming out. So she's a therapist, and we did a conference and a podcast about explaining cybersecurity to the people who are helping protect their clients or helping their clients navigate this web of technology we've all built. So that book will be out later on this year. That's Securing Sexuality.
Fascinating. That's really cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, Wolf, for joining us. And thanks to you for being a listener. If you have a suggestion for an episode of Packet Protector, or you have a correction, a question, a comment, you can reach out at packetpushers.net/FU. The FUs for follow-up. We do appreciate when listeners reach out. By the way, Packet Protector is part of the Packet Pushers podcast network. That network includes a dozen technical podcasts for your professional development on networking, security, IPv6, DevOps, and more, an industry blog, 2 weekly newsletters, a community Slack group, a YouTube channel, and an IRC group. Find everything at packetpushers.net. All free, no login required.